Buonasera a tutti. Eccellenza, signora ambasciatrice, illustri relatori, cari colleghi, studenti ed amici, vorrei sottolineare subito la presenza degli amici di Camilla. Si vedono numerosi qua, la numerosa presenza che merita d'essere sottolineata. Apprezziamo e vi ringraziamo per la vostra presenza. Porgo un cordialissimo benvenuto a tutti voi nella Pontificia Università Gregoriana da parte della Facoltà di Storia e Beni Culturali della Chiesa e il mio personale saluto come decano della facoltà. Un cordiale benvenuto a tutti voi presenti in questa aula appena fatta, ancora si sente, è nuova, nuovissima, difatti ben fatta. Quindi benvenuto a tutti voi riuniti qua per partecipare alla presentazione del libro di Camilla Russell, che saluto in modo particolare, unendomi a tante felicitazioni e congratulazioni che le sono giunte da tutto il mondo per questo suo libro. Il libro Teen e Jesuits in Renaissance Italy, Biographical Writing in the Early Global Age. Siamo qui per presentare il libro, ma anche per festeggiare la pubblicazione di Camilla, frutto di anni delle sue ricerche, fatiche, eccetera, lavori. Chi lo fa lo capisce molto bene. L'autrice merita già da ora un applauso. Sono molto lieto dell'evento che celebriamo oggi qui, alla Gregoriana, fondata da Sant'Ignazio di Loyola, anche se non con questo nome e non così come si presenta oggi, un evento che vede coinvolte e anzi unite in collaborazione varie istituzioni della Compagnia di Gesù. È questo che mi piace di sottolineare ed è degno di essere sottolineato. La collaborazione di varie istituzioni della Compagnia di Gesù. La nostra Facoltà di Storia e Beni Culturali della Chiesa della Pontificia Università Gregoriana, l'Archivum Romanum Societatis Jesu e l'Istituto Storico della Compagnia di Gesù, l'istituto storico ormai. E questo insieme all'ambasciata d'Australia presso la Santa Sede. Desidero dunque innanzitutto salutare Sua Eccellenza la signora Chiara Porro, ambasciatrice d'Australia presso la Santa Sede, e il padre Festom Kenda, direttore accademico dell'Archivum Romanum Societatis Jesu. Siamo qui dunque per festeggiare la pubblicazione, come già ho anticipato, però siamo qui perché interessati al contenuto del libro, anche se il libro già lo conoscete, già lo conosciamo tutti. Gli illustri relatori, che saluto molto cordialmente, ci accompagneranno oggi pomeriggio nell'approfondire il contenuto del libro e quindi la sua lettura. La professoressa Fernanda Alfieri dell'Università di Bologna, il professor Simon Ditchfield dell'Università di York e il professor Jim Grammer della nostra università, direttore del Centro di Studi sulla Spiritualità Ignaziana di questa università. A questo punto non mi rimane che augurarvi una buona presentazione, cioè una bella e proficua, arricchente serata. Grazie a tutti.
Buonasera a tutti, sono molto contenta, ma devo dire non tanto sorpresa di vedervi così numerosi stasera per festeggiare Camilla. Vorrei iniziare ringraziando innanzitutto la Pontificia Università Gregoriana, il decano, per la generosa ospitalità che ha reso possibile questo incontro stasera, che ha obiettivo la presentazione di questo libro, Being a Jesuit in Renaissance Italy. Sono lieta del sostegno che l'Ambasciata di Australia presso la Santa Sede ha dato all'evento di oggi insieme all'Istituto Storico della Compagnia di Gesù, dando non solo un riconoscimento al lavoro di una grande ricercatrice australiana, ma anche creando uno spazio alla riflessione su tematiche tanto importanti oggi quanto lo erano nell'epoca di cui tratta questo libro. Una di queste tematiche, che senza dubbio verrà sottolineata negli interventi che seguiranno, è quella dello sviluppo della dimensione globale della Compagnia di Gesù. Il libro in presentazione oggi rintraccia questa traiettoria tramite documenti che danno una visione sia comune che individuale di come i primi gesuiti mettevano in pratica la loro vocazione missionaria. Una vocazione globale che in qualche modo è evidenziabile anche tra il pubblico di quest'aula, fortemente rappresentato da diverse nazionalità e origini. Colgo l'occasione per citare la presenza del segretario della Compagnia di Gesù, padre Antoine Kerouel, grande sostenitore della ricerca storica sull'ordine e a chi vorrei rivolgere un cordiale saluto. Vista anche l'internazionalità di questo evento, se permettete vorrei dire anche qualche parola in inglese, trattandosi dopo tutto di un libro scritto e pubblicato in quella lingua. It's always a source of great pride when a fellow Australian leaves a mark internationally, and particularly when they do so in such a groundbreaking way as Camilla Russell. Camilla, of course, is not just the author of the book we are launching tonight, but she's an academic who holds a senior role at the Jesuit General Curia in her capacity as publications editor with the Roman Jesuit Archive, a role that for the first time has been held by a woman. And although she has spent enough years in this city to be regarded as an adoptive Roman, I'd like to think that Camilla's academic interests are a reflection of an adventurous and inquisitive spirit that is Australian through and through. So it's through these two unique lenses, as a female historian from what was until recently known as a mission country, that Camilla brings to life the history of the Society of Jesus and its influences that are still very much present today. Camilla has published extensively throughout her academic career, and many of her recent papers have tackled the question of what it meant to be a Jesuit in the years immediately following the Society's foundation. In this new book, Camilla paints a rich picture of the experiences of these early Jesuit missionaries, whilst bringing up pertinent questions about the workings of cultural contact, how we exchange knowledge, how we process differences, and how we confront new experiences through the eyes of personal faith or beliefs. The book also sheds new light on the Jesuits as an organisation in those first years of existence. Camilla's research uncovers fascinating detail about how individuals petitioned to be sent abroad and the selection process that followed, what considerations were taken into account, and how decisions were made. We also learn about the formation and training given to a Renaissance Jesuit, which unsurprisingly, given the Society's focus on education, played a very important role even in those early years. The book also introduces us to the Society's approach to utilizing the talents and capabilities of its members to achieve its missionary purpose. We look at innovative notions of what we could today describe as people or skills management, for example, even perhaps an appreciation of human diversity as a strength. That innovative approach, visible already in the 1500s, may well help us understand the reasons for the Jesuits' successful expansion and lasting influence over the centuries that followed. Camilla's work also tells us about how the defining institutional traits of the society were gestating in those early years. And not just traits, but values, really. Values which, as I was saying in Italian earlier, explain the society's global dimension, that impulse to look beyond Rome, beyond Europe, and bridge the gap with the rest of the world. These are values that have ultimately been instilled at the heart of the Catholic Church, slowly changing the old paradigms of Eurocentrism and reaffirming the universal nature of the Catholic Church and its purpose. This transformation has been in motion for many years, of course, and many view the election of Pope Francis as the first Jesuit pope and the first pope from what was considered the New World as an important step in that process. There's still some way to go as the Church continues to recalibrate its relationship with peoples and cultures in the peripheries of the world. For example, the engagement and acknowledgement of Indigenous peoples and the preservation of Indigenous knowledge. Australia shares this commitment as we too continue on a journey of healing and reconnection with our First Nations. Perhaps there is more we could learn from the Jesuits here too, as I learnt stumbling across ruins of a Jesuit mission from 1886 when I was visiting an Aboriginal community in the outback earlier this year. To conclude, I want to pay tribute once again to the extraordinary achievements of Dr. Camilla Russell, a remarkable Australian woman who in her own way is helping to bridge gaps and highlight the culture of encounter, which in today's world is so sorely needed. I look forward to toasting to her success at the end of this presentation with you all. Thank you all for coming.
I'm very happy to be here and to join everyone in celebrating this book and in a way celebrating Camilla. As someone who works at RC, that is at the Jesuit Roman Archives, I read Dr. Russell's book like a vendor reading something written about the merchandise he is selling. One of the main tasks of RC is to preserve documents and to make them available to researchers for purposes of scholarship. In Being a Jesuit in Renaissance Italy, Dr. Russell reveals to us the importance of this double task of preservation and access. As she tells us in the book, the protagonists of her account are Jesuits who lived in the first century of the society, that is from around the mid-16th century to around mid-17th century. Moreover, the biographical documents that underpin the study are all located in the Archivum Romanum Societatis Jesu, she tells us. For an archivist like myself, this observation cannot but evoke feelings of gratitude, noting that generations of Jesuits, together with their friends and collaborators, have preserved the documents with dedication for centuries, sometimes in very challenging situations. But more than the gratitude it evokes, Dr. Russell's book reveals to us the importance of the documents we hold, not only for purposes of Jesuit history, but also for topics that are as broad as Renaissance Italy and as global as Christian missiology. I must also confess that after reading Being a Jesuit in Renaissance Italy, I now walk into the Jesuit archives with a special kind of reverence. This is not because of anything like the idolatria documentale, which the Reverend Father General recently warned us against. Rather, it is a reverence flowing from the persuasive arguments presented by Dr. Russell that the biographical records held at RC are rational, factual, and spiritual. One feels that this book breathes life into the dry bones of archival documents that people always think the documents are. And Dr. Russell tells us even more. While the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, and quote, pointed the way for Jesuits in their prayer, place, and action, the biographical documents functioned as exercises, continuation, and application with their multiple purposes and meanings, from the bureaucratic to the intimate and personal to the spiritual. They carried these roots within them and reveal a kind of genetic code of what makes a Jesuit, end of quote. I would like to end these remarks by expressing our gratitude and satisfaction for having Dr. Russell at the helm of our RC publications. As editorial manager, she oversees the continuation of a scholarly tradition that has lasted almost a century and a half, contributing critical studies to the conversations about Jesuits in the context of global Catholicism and of the modern world. In that capacity, she oversees the publication of our journal, the Archivum Historicum Societatis Jesu, now in its 46th year of continuous publication, and our 4-book series, the Monumenta Historica Societatis Jesu, under which 152 volumes have been published, the Monumenta Historica Societatis Jesu Nova series, under which 11 volumes have been published, and the Bibliotheca Instituti Historici Societatis Jesu, under which 72 volumes have been published, and the Subsidia ad Historiam Societatis Jesu, under which 12 volumes have been published. As we congratulate Camilla for publication of this book that is so great, I hope that motivated by the work of the editorial manager, you will take an interest in these publications, and that some of you will seriously consider publishing with us in the future. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege and honor to go first. So what I'd like to do is remind some of you perhaps of a joke you've heard. If you've met one Benedictine, you've met all the Benedictines, inferring that those who live according to the rule of St. Benedict turn out to be all alike. But if you've met one Jesuit, you've met one Jesuit, suggesting that they're all different. And I think I wanted to point that out just because of the cover. The cover of the book, it seems to me, expresses a reality that's truly fantastic. And I want to come back later to what Festo said about the genetic code, because I think that's a very important part of what's going on. Because another one of those jokes is that if 4 Jesuits are having a discussion, there will be at least 6 different opinions, and at least one of the Jesuits will be arguing against his own opinions. So I think in the cover of the book you can see this illustrated very well. The faces of the early companions are all unique. Each face is a different person. It's not like those medieval illustrations where there's a generic person, but these are all different. And I, for example, was surprised to see the person here as Francis Xavier because he's really chubby and hasn't missed a meal in years. Not the kind of person I thought who was starving to death in Japan and on the verge of going into China. But each person is an individual, and I think one of the things that Camilla has done in her book is present a number of different individuals so that you can see some, perhaps a few family traits that are there, but instead, and very much underlined, is the fact that these are unique individuals who are responding to grace and the context of their times in very unique and interesting kinds of ways. The book is organized in a really straightforward way, which I think helps enter into the argument and see it as it unfolds and develops. There's a wonderful introduction that sets the book in its historiographical context, makes sense of the argument, presents the argument as Festo underlined. This book is about pointing out how these biographical records help us see the Jesuits in their relational, factual, and spiritual context. The first chapter is about vocation and entry into the society, natural enough, but explains the family background, where these people came from, and really the context in which they grew up and had a religious vocation and entered the Society of Jesus. Second chapter, which is about the same size, 33 pages, looks at the candidates and how they were identified for overseas missions. Many of them volunteered, but others were volunteered. Someone said, this guy would be really good in India, this guy would be really good in China, and not just because we want to get rid of him from here in Italy, but because we think he'd do a good job. The middle chapter, the meat of the book, is about being a Jesuit in the Indies, because the documents on which this research is based are primarily about those who went to India, what they did once they got there, how they used the learning that they obtained while they were here, and what they did afterwards. The fourth chapter, again about 30 pages, looks at what Italian Jesuits did when they were in Italy. Not all of these people obviously went to India. Some of those who people thought would go to India stayed here and did all kinds of different work. And so that chapter looks at their accomplishments. And the last chapter looks at those who left the society and those who died. I guess there's two ways to leave the society. You can just go or you can die. But what I found particularly interesting in that section was that the statistics haven't changed very much in the last 500 years. About the same number of people depart the society before they die as those who leave the society now before they die. And the afterword brings the book together and I think makes some really interesting remarks about a continuity as well as change. I just want to focus on two things which are actually rather personal because of my own experience. So, as I read this book, I thought, I know these guys. I know who she's talking about. They're not very different from the people that I know and live with. They're not very different from the people that I read letters from or wrote letters for on behalf of Father General. In that sense, it wasn't a big surprise. And it reminded me, for example, of times when I was in the rec room at Creighton University and heard Jesuits, who are a generation ahead of me, talking about when they wrote a letter to Father General volunteering to go to Korea. So this idea of volunteering to go to mission territories, it's certainly within living memory. Potential candidates to the Society of Jesus continue to write biographies before their interviews as part of the interview process. They probably write more than these guys wrote in Camilla's book because word processing is spoiling us. And they haven't learned how to use the delete button yet. But there's tremendous information for the future, so this kind of research can continue. We still have informaciones ad gubernandum that we use for regular governance, and they turn out to be really helpful. The letters that I read from the Jesuits from the provincials of the United States to Father General report the same kinds of things which Camilla talks about in those reports that came back to Rome, and also the reports that went from Rome to other places in the world. So 500 years later, the same kinds of things still happen. I suppose that could mean we're in a rut. But it could also mean that St. Ignatius knew what he was doing when he set the society in motion, and that the procedures he put in place continue to serve us well. As I came to the end of the book, I found myself wanting more. How did these Jesuits make the spiritual exercises? It's one thing to look at the text of Ignatius and have a pretty good idea of what was going on. It's another thing to read their retreat notes and letters and other kinds of things, so we can hope that perhaps in the future some of those things will be discovered and we'll be able to use even more of them than Camilla was able to, although there's some of that in the book. What was the experience of the people to whom they ministered? This is a part of the historiography of the Society of Jesus, I think, that's only now beginning to grow and develop. What was the impact of Jesuits on others? And so it behooves us to study more from the grassroots than from what happened from Rome. And then the last question I asked myself was, how does this experience of Italians relate to that of the Spanish and the Portuguese and the French and maybe even the Irish Jesuits who were active at the same time? What can we learn not only from this Italian experience, but kind of a comparing and contrasting of what's happened in other parts of the world? So let me end by saying it's a wonderful book. It's really terrific. I loved it. It put the meat on John O'Malley's book. When some of us studied this book in my first year here at O'Malley's book, my first year here at the Gregorian, it was noted that he only did research in the printed sources. He didn't consult the archives very much. Camilla has introduced the archives to the world. She's proven that O'Malley did know what he was talking about, but I think she's given a much richer and more complete understanding of what those first generations of Jesuits were all about. So thank you very much for what you've done, and thank you very much for what you, I think, are inspiring us to do in the future.
Sono molto grata di questa occasione di discussione e di confronto su un libro importante che tiene insieme il metodo, un metodo di esemplare solidità e il piacere della lettura, offrendo senza mai cadere nell'aneddotico la possibilità di incontrare una varietà di vite e di storie che catturano chi legge per la ricchezza di esperienza, per la complessità psicologica, altre volte per una disarmante semplicità che è solo però apparente. E il libro di Camilla Russell è un libro su un ordine religioso, su un corpo collettivo organizzato secondo un'ossatura di regole precise stilate nei primi anni della sua fondazione, che lo strutturerà lungo una storia secolare, sappiamo non priva di travaglio, che qui viene colta nei suoi primi 100 anni, dal riconoscimento pontificio nel 1540 al 1640. E c'è un'immagine molto efficace che ricorre sin dalle prime pagine e accompagna l'intera struttura del libro, cioè quella dell'albero, le cui radici sono i testi fondativi, mentre i rami sono la storia dell'ordine di Ignazio fatta delle singole vite dei membri della compagnia. Ma questo è anche, come accennavo, un libro su decine e decine e decine di vite di individui che con la loro singolarità irriducibile, alcuni noti, altri invece sarebbero rimasti nell'anonimato se non avessero trovato ospitalità in questo libro, hanno vissuto all'interno di questo corpo collettivo accettando di farsi plasmare dalle sue regole e al contempo però negoziando con queste regole, quindi contribuendo a plasmarlo a loro volta, e l'identità individuale qui emerge in pieno come un fatto relazionale. Ma questo è anche forse soprattutto un libro su un archivio che viene osservato con grande originalità ma in piena coerenza con la storia dell'ordine che lo ha prodotto nelle sue dinamiche di costruzione, che sono, come chiarisce l'autrice dall'inizio, di natura relazionale, fattuale e spirituale, come è già stato ricordato. E l'Archivum Romanum Societatis Jesu è sia l'immenso contenitore di documenti su cui si basa la ricerca, quindi in qualche modo il suo strumento, potremmo dire la sua causa materiale, aristotelicamente, ma anche il suo protagonista, perché le sue carte sono il frutto e insieme con causa dell'organizzazione, dell'ordine che lo produce. Ed è un'organizzazione che la ricerca fa emergere come esemplarmente lineare nelle sue basi normative e amministrative. Questa è una dimensione molto forte della ricostruzione, ma che tuttavia viene continuamente complicata nell'incontro con la imprevedibilità delle vite dei membri dell'ordine e dei contesti in cui questi uomini operano. C'è quindi una linea gerarchica con all'apice un padre generale che, come chiedono le costituzioni dell'ordine, come chiarisce poi la formula scribendi stilata da Juan de Polanco, il segretario del fondatore dell'ordine, deve essere informato periodicamente dall'operato dei suoi figli e fratelli, ovunque si trovino e in qualunque opera siano impegnati. Ma c'è poi anche una linea orizzontale in cui entra l'immediatezza della relazione, l'imprevedibilità, lo scambio informale di informazioni, l'esperienza condivisa, ma anche il controllo reciproco sostanziato dal dovere evangelico di correzione fraterna, quindi anche la potenziale conflittualità. E c'è poi un'altra linea importantissima e imprevedibile nelle sue traiettorie, che è quella della relazione che ogni individuo ha, o meglio deve avere con se stesso, cioè con una coscienza abitata dalla scintilla del divino, ma anche dalla fragilità dell'arbitrio umano. Quindi la relazione con una volontà che fin dal primo passo nel noviziato dell'ordine viene interpellata come motore fondamentale della scelta, ma anche come oggetto di monitoraggio e di messa in parola costante. E questo spazio della profondità interiore è costantemente tematizzato nelle carte studiate da Camilla Russell, non soltanto quando per esempio viene esplicitamente esposto secondo il protocollo previsto nell'iter d'ingresso, come accade nel corpus delle vocazioni, corpus che viene prodotto nel noviziato romano di Sant'Andrea della Valle e in cui resta una traccia sistematica particolarmente densa fra gli anni 30 e 40 del Seicento, ma il mondo interiore è presente anche quando, per esempio, si elencano gli oggetti che il novizio porta con sé nel momento dell'ingresso. E quindi quei fazzoletti, quei calzoni, quei libri, quei cappelli, a volte cavalli, armi, che lo scavo documentario porta alla luce, non sono solo oggetti, ma sono anche simboli che compongono una precisa immagine di sé che si vuole dare, la rappresentazione di uno status, di un mondo di relazioni che si vuol far conoscere proprio nel momento in cui lo si lascia. È come dire il proprio sé originario che muore, sacrificato per la missione alla quale il candidato gesuita aspira. E il libro di Camilla Russell coglie la vita di un gesuita nella prima età moderna partendo proprio da qui, cioè da questo momento soglia, che è solo all'apparenza prosaico, in questa dimensione documentaria che vi ho appena citato, e secondo una traiettoria che segue al contempo sia la vita biologica dell'individuo, come è già stato ricordato, l'ultimo capitolo è dedicato alla morte fisica, oltre che alla morte all'ordine, come il caso dei dimessi, sia la vita spirituale del membro dell'ordine che, una volta che viene accolto fra gli uomini di Ignazio, entra in un percorso dominato da una gerarchia non negoziabile di priorità. Cioè in cima c'è la missione evangelizzatrice, possibilmente in un luogo ostile, che sarà la scena desiderata del martirio. E questo scopo prioritario, il libro lo mostra molto bene, motiva l'adozione di una serie di predisposizioni comportamentali e spirituali che plasmano l'identità tipica dei soggetti studiati da Camilla Russell, come l'indifferenza, la capacità di accomodazio, e queste disposizioni di animo e di azione sono le basi di una mobilità sistematicamente attesa e desiderata per il membro dell'ordine della Compagnia di Gesù, a prescindere dai tempi, a prescindere dai luoghi, che lo disancora da tutti quegli elementi di definizione identitaria che sono invece caratteristici dell'individuo secolare, quindi l'origine familiare, locale, la proprietà di beni, la professione, la capacità di produrre una prole, di tenere insieme l'ordine gerarchico di una piccola comunità domestica. Ma per citare dalla sezione centrale del libro, che è dedicata alla missione, che è significativamente centrale anche nella vita dei membri della Compagnia di Gesù che vengono qui riportati alla luce, cito: se i muri della Compagnia di Gesù erano fatti di mattoni di carta mobili, gli autori di questi documenti erano l'edificio tenuto insieme dalle loro corrispondenze, traduzione ovviamente mia. E l'ordine di Ignazio, come mostra la ricerca di Camilla Russell con grandissima efficacia, non si tiene insieme su un sistema di governo basato sulla presenza fisica, sul controllo. Sì, le congregazioni che si riuniscono in occasione delle elezioni dei padri generali sono degli appuntamenti normativi fondamentali, ma il tessuto connettivo è la scrittura, ed è una scrittura ininterrotta. È la lettera, lo strumento di comunicazione e di governo, è la parola scritta dal padre generale a migliaia e migliaia di leghe di distanza, è giunta anche un anno dopo a raccordare una milizia di migliaia di uomini sparsi per tutto il mondo conosciuto. E quindi c'è sempre una tensione verso l'altrove missionario, del resto è quello che connota la natura cattolica, apostolica e universale del corpo organizzato che studia Camilla Russell, ma c'è sempre anche un centro al quale tornare attraverso le parole, e parole che contano, che hanno un peso decisionale, normativo, ed è Roma. E questo implica affrontare la storia della Compagnia di Gesù come la storia di una comunità testuale, e questa è la felice formula di Brian Stock che qui viene ripresa, e quindi anche una storia dell'informazione, oltre che una storia del fatto religioso, del potere, delle sue forme, della società giurata dell'età moderna, perché è la promessa vincolata alla coscienza alla quale il governo della compagnia in queste ramificazioni globali si affida, e della soggettività e della psicologia, perché le centinaia e centinaia di voci singole che lasciano traccia nell'archivio che Camilla magistralmente recupera si raccontano secondo una visione dell'umano gesuitica che si nutre di spiritualità, e in primis quella degli esercizi spirituali, di cui la compagnia era nota, esperta, ma portando anche spesso visioni di senso comune, non necessariamente erudite, quindi è una storia culturale anche ad ampio spettro. E il bellissimo lavoro di Camilla Russell riesce a tenere insieme questa complessità, alla quale io ho potuto soltanto ovviamente accennare, restituendola a chi legge con grande chiarezza e efficacia. Quindi grazie all'autrice.
I began a recent article with the sentence, "There's never been a better time to write about the Jesuits." I went on to say that the last 20 years or so, in particular, has seen a renaissance in the study of both the old pre-suppression society and the new one from 1814 onwards. I also noted that although members of the society have continued to play an active and very distinguished part in this revival, just over this last 12 months we have lost two such giants as John Pagberg and John O'Malley, the field of Jesuit studies is now a genuinely ecumenical enterprise, open to scholars, both religious and lay, from all disciplines, and who work in all four corners of the globe, as befits a religious order that has contributed in such fundamental ways to what some historians have referred to as the age of the first globalization. It's within such a context, I believe, we should place Camilla Russell's very welcome and highly accomplished study of biographical writing in the early global age. It was published, of course, in the flagship series from Harvard University Press, the Itati Studies in Italian Renaissance History, appropriately enough, since she was a fellow at Harvard's Itati, just outside Florence, where she began research for this book, and also found her husband. It's also very appropriate, given the observations I have just made, that the author, as has already been remarked already, is lay, female, and Australian, even though Rome has for some years now been her adoptive home. Indeed, what renders this book so valuable, I think, is the author's mastery of local particular detail, deriving from her daily familiarity with the precious documents kept in the Jesuit archives already mentioned by Father Macendon, next to which she has worked now for some 7 years as editor of publications at the Institutum Historicum Societatis Jesu. This detailed local knowledge is complemented by a breadth of intellectual sympathy and by a solid rigor of historical training that was nurtured first by several distinguished teachers at Melbourne University, where she took a double major bachelor's degree in history and Italian, before taking a master's in straight history with a dissertation on Lodovico Beccadilli and the debates over episcopal residence at the Council of Trent. Her teachers there included, at undergraduate level, Ian Robertson, former deputy director of the British School at Rome, as well as, for her master's thesis, the incomparable Barry Collett, whose study of the Congregation of Santa Giustina in Padua, Italian Benedictine scholars and the Reformation of 1986, is still considered by us early modern Italianisti as one of the landmark studies in our field. I also learned just this morning that as a visiting student in Pisa, Camilla was able to benefit from the advice of the doyen of our field, Adriano Prosperi, who advised her with her Beccadilli project. Camilla was then mentored by the mistress of them that know about Renaissance humanism and humanists, Alison Brown, at Royal Holloway of the University of London, who supervised Camilla's doctoral thesis on Giulio Gonzaga in the context of religious controversy in 16th century Italy. Returning to the book we're discussing and celebrating tonight, the author has deployed her intimate familiarity with the Jesuit Roman archives to write a study that shows simultaneously how the institutional shaped the personal, as well as vice versa. The central insight which drives her analysis and interpretation is the shaping force of Ignatius of Loyola's founding vision, as expressed in a trio of remarkable texts: the Spiritual Exercises, the General Examen, and the Constitutions. In this sense, the Society was, as she puts it, also, we've already heard the phrase that Fernando also used, borrowing from Brian Stock, a textual community, where identity, as Camilla observes, was negotiated and renegotiated with reference to authoritative texts. But it was at the same time also an imagined community, to borrow Benedict Anderson's felicitous phrase, whose members understood such texts through the lens of quotidian experience. Camilla also makes the important point that the very richness of the documentary evidence which underlies her study testifies not so much to the evolving and relentless certainty and self-confidence of an order that overcame all obstacles before it, but rather to its status as a new religious institute, attempting to establish itself, including its credentials, values, orthodoxy, and obedience, in the challenging, competitive religious environment of the 16th century. In this context, negotiated processes rather than rigid hierarchies, blind obedience, or hegemonic conformity was central to the society and to its identity. Furthermore, Camilla reminds us that documents in the Jesuit archives are not only important for their content, but also for what their form tells us about the interests, priorities, and concerns of the society. To use her own words, such documents are not transparent representations of events. I'd like to bring these brief reflections to a close by continuing to engage directly with what Camilla says about the texts which lie at the centre of her study, and whose very centrality, I believe, will guarantee her book a very long shelf life. The passage I have chosen to read now comes from her afterword. To my mind, it functions as simultaneously a compelling portrait of what she has achieved, as well as being an elegant exposition of her method. And she says, the texts analysed in this book functioned in three main ways. They provided in paper form the monastic walls that the Jesuits lacked. They laid the material and textual foundations in the construction of an historical memory and spiritual community, and they facilitated the organisation of the society, which was hierarchical to be sure, but also interactive, consultative, and, what has been termed in this study, dialogic. With this term, the book has attempted to outline the mechanisms of an exchange on paper between unequal parties, according to the principle of obedience that underpinned the society's operations, as well as that of individual discernment enjoined on every member of the society through prayer, meditation, and accompaniment. The interactive dynamic that these documents are expression of had the aim of aligning each member's individual strengths and inclinations with the objectives of the society, which identified Jesuits both collectively and singly as working in the world for the greater glory of God. With that final phrase ringing in our ears, I think it behoves me to bring this tribute, for tribute it most definitely is, to a close. Thank you, Camilla.
Molte grazie. Mando un caro saluto a tutti quanti presenti. Thank you very much then to the chair of this evening's book launch, Dean Marek Inglet, SJ of the Faculty of History and Cultural Heritage of the Church, and the host, the Pontifical Gregorian University, and to the university's rector, Mark Lewis, SJ, and all of the staff who did such a great job in bringing the event together this evening. Thank you. I want to thank also the partners that participated in this event, the Australian Ambassador to the Holy See, Chiara Porro, and the embassy team looking after the refreshments in a few minutes from now, you'll be pleased to know. The Academic Director, Festo Mkenda SJ, representing the Roman Jesuit Archive here tonight, who spoke earlier, and its publication imprint, IHSI, which I represent as its editor. At the Archive and Institute, we care a lot about history, good history, about all aspects and geographies of the Society of Jesus. Just outside this room, along with my book, you will find a sample of recent IHSI publications available for purchase at a discount, and my thanks go to the Libreria GB Press team for making it possible to have these books on display. So do just take a look as well, so that you can see the kind of work that we do at the Istituto Historico, which is located at the Roman Jesuit Archive. The speakers shared with you many insights into the book, and I thank them. James Grummer, SJ, Fernanda Alfieri, and Simon Ditchfield. I will not add more about the book except for two brief points about two inspirations for my work over the years that it took to write it. The first was geographical curiosity. I wanted to get as close to my country of origin, Australia, as my training in the Italian Renaissance and early modern periods permitted me. The Roman Jesuit archives took me there, the so-called Indies of the East. From the Roman-centric world that I studied, I wanted to travel to the margins. The other inspirations similarly concerned another kind of periphery in some senses. I decided to study the institution's early history, not so much at its centre through those who governed and what they wrote, but through its individual members and their written perspectives as single members of their Society of Jesus. These two peripheries, let's say, the distant Indies and the individual Jesuit perspective, I argued, were animating features of the early Society of Jesus that made them both appealing and immensely successful. Given our setting here at the Gregorian in the city of Rome and my own role working with the Society of Jesus, to today's Jesuits, I say, I hope these findings provide some useful perspective on your own origins, and to fellow historians and the wider public, I hope to have demonstrated that the margins are where we need to look in order to understand the whole. Even though I am named as the author of this volume, the work has many collaborative elements and is the result of a great deal of support from several institutions and individuals. Villa-Ritatti, the Harvard University Center for Italian Renaissance Studies, was the first to support this research project, sharing my vision that Asia and the Italian Renaissance might be viewed within a single project's frame. Itatti continued to support my work by publishing this book through the Itatti series with Harvard University Press, and I thank former series editor Kate Lowe for her support in the book project's early stages to submission, and the current series editor Nick Terpstra, as well as HUP's series editor Emily Silk, and the whole wonderful Harvard University Press team. I wish to thank also Villa-Ritatti's directors and staff, past and present, and especially current director, Alina Payne. The University of Newcastle, New South Wales, in Australia, where I was tenured lecturer in history before moving to Rome, further supported me and this project, also through my current affiliation as fellow with the university. My students from almost all of the continents of the world have been an inspiration. And they have instructed me about history in our historical journeys in so many ways. So I thank my students, past and present. In Rome, I've been privileged to teach here at the Gregorian University, also through a series of public lectures in 2015, right here at the Gregorian, at Roma Tre University, Catholic University of America, Rome campus, and as history PhD co-supervisor and Collegio del Dottorato member at Sapienza University. Thanks to all of you for those opportunities. In the USA, the Collegeville Institute for Ecumenical and Cultural Research in Minnesota, USA, awarded me a generous 1-month writer's residency on their beautiful Benedictine lands. Thank you. I wrote my final chapter there. Fellow scholars in Rome are my companions on the shared journey of research. Many of you are here tonight. Grazie della vostra presenza e amicizia. My friends in Rome, the Caravita community, and my family are a constant support and wonderful presence, so many of whom are here, with a special mention of my parents, Wendy and Michael Russell, here from Australia, and my husband, Mario, and his children, Marco and Bianca. Bianca can't be with us in person, unfortunately, and other dear members of my Rome-based family, Giorgio, Ulte, Pietro, and Paola. When I took on my current role as IHSI Publications Editor back in 2015, in some ways my work on this book slowed down and got much better, I think. While working hard on the publications program with IHSI's authors in the journal and book series that I'm responsible for, in my time outside of that work, dedicated to teaching, writing and research, my book benefited from that world of knowledge that fellow writers in Jesuit history generously shared with me. Not to mention my colleagues at the archive, the archivists and librarians, and its wonderful resources, and the wider Curia environment where I work. Today's successes at the Roman General Curia of the Society of Jesus, today's successes to the assistants, provincials, Jesuit scholars in formation, and lay collaborators that I studied in the 16th and 17th centuries, and the subject of my book, today led by Father General Arturo Sosa, S.J., and the Society's Secretary Antoine Kerouel, S.J., here tonight. They have also inspired me and informed me in my reflections about the nature and history of the Society of Jesus, so thanks to them as well. At the archive, along with the current academic director, I also wish to thank former academic director Brian McQuarte, S.J., as well as our administrative director, who is back home in Uruguay right now, Father Raul Gonzalez, S.J. Through my work serving IHSI publications, I have the chance to work with scholars, Jesuits and not, in posing new questions of the Society's past and presenting new interpretations about it. There is much yet to be done in the field in general, and for me personally as author and editor. And I look forward to the challenge. So thanks for coming here tonight to help celebrate this book.